You and I have been deep in this project for a few months. What is Red Alert and what are we hoping to achieve with the project?
Red Alert is our bringing together 5 experts in the field of national security, and that's defined broadly. National security, not just defence kit, but all the larger meanings of that phrase, including national resilience, supply, all of that. To get together for a day and a half, they were very willing contributors, contributed their time out of patriotic duty and public interest to broaden the public debate and discuss Australia's national security, where it stands, and what we need.
So we have 5 experts. As you just said, Mick Ryan is a retired Army general and has become very prominent during the war in Ukraine for his commentary. We have Peter Jennings, who was a senior official in the Department of Defence, and he ran the Australian Strategic Policy Institute for a decade. He's an expert in defence policy. We have Leslie Seebeck, who's held many senior public service positions and is a real guru on cyber technology. We have Lavina Lee from Macquarie University, who is an expert in strategic studies, geopolitics, foreign policy. And then fifth, but certainly not last, we have Alan Finkel, who is the former chief scientist of Australia and is a real expert on science, technology, research, development.
And one of the things I thought that worked really well with that group was that they all have expertise, but they all have differing expertise. They all come at these questions from slightly different angles, and I thought that produced a really rounded and balanced set of ideas and discussions.
Yes, definitely. They were encouraged to disagree where they wanted to, but also to try and find areas where they could reach common ground.
And they certainly disagreed.
Yes.
Yeah, on quite a few things. It was quite spirited and fun at times.
So far, China has been very careful, though, not to provoke warfare. It's had a lot of ambitious and aggressive moves without kinetic war. Why do you think they would change? Why would they change a winning strategy? Why would they want to engage in a shooting war?
I think there's possibly the idea that there's a window of opportunity. So when we think about what the United States and Australia are thinking about our preparedness, the Chinese are also making assessments about the relative capabilities that they have. And even from the Western perspective or the Allied perspective, we're very worried about the fact that there's a tipping point in relative capabilities where the United States has to think about its global responsibilities, whereas China can concentrate on the Indo-Pacific, and it has very clear aims in the Indo-Pacific.
China makes no secret of its military intent. Every speech Xi Jinping gives to the military, he says, prepare for war. We've had the fortification of those islands in the South China Sea, building military bases. We have daily aggressive Chinese air and sea incursions into areas claimed by Japan, areas claimed by Taiwan. So China has gone as close as it can, short of conflict, to actually positioning itself militarily.
I think a skeptic might suggest China is only just coming out of this period of COVID isolation. They've seen what's happened in Ukraine, that it hasn't gone the way Russia had planned. Is a weak China something that we should be less worried about or more worried about?
We should definitely be more worried about it because, again, it goes back to the point that Lavina was making. There is a closing window of opportunity. And we're seeing that point where they're getting to that tipping balance in the region with competition. They've spoken about parity with the United States in 2027. And if they can speed that up, so much the better. They will be taking lessons from Ukraine. They'll be watching what's happening there and saying, we can improve on that.
So, Alan, what do you think? How serious is the situation?
The risk of a conflict in the Indo-Pacific, in South China Seas or China over Taiwan is increased on a broader background. We've had the war in Ukraine. We're also seeing a kind of reversal of the economic globalization that we've enjoyed for 30 to 40 years. And there's a mixture of climate policy with industry policy that is leading to countries closing their economic borders by investing in their internal capability. And so it's a deglobalization. And those sorts of economic pressures just raise the overall tension internationally, and so you've got specific issues sitting on a broader international tension that I think makes potential conflict more likely.
Okay, so if that's the consensus, why does Australia need to get involved in a potential conflict? Why do we have a dog in this fight?
Well, I think, at heart, all democracies matter or no democracies matter. There's a reason why we're supporting Ukraine. We support the aspirations of humans to choose their own governments and live their lives as they want, wherever that occurs on this planet. We're doing it with Ukrainians, and given Taiwan is another small island nation of 25 million people, we have a deep interest in the preservation of their democracy, but also preservation of a broader order where large authoritarians can't be predators on smaller democratic nations.
Peter, I don't want to aid you at all here, but you've been writing in depth about these issues, national security in China, for decades. Did anything that the panelists discuss surprise you or make you rethink anything in these areas?
I was surprised at how readily and forcibly they concurred on the critical points. We're talking about China. Governments talk about geostrategic stresses, but what they really mean is China. Second, that it was a real and imminent threat. Third, that Australia was profoundly unprepared. And some of that is big stuff that we know. For example, we spend $40 billion a year on defence, yet Australia has no long-range strike capability. An extraordinary failure. But also right down to the fact, a point that I think Peter Jennings made, that none of Australia's military bases are hardened. So if there is a preemptive strike, and if the Chinese government is preparing to take on the US, they may well consider a preemptive strike, according to our experts, against the US and its assets in the region. What did you think about their overarching point? Did it take you by surprise that they thought the most important preparation Australia could make wasn't ships, planes, or hardened bases, but the national psyche?
Yes, that was definitely a big part of the message, and also that governments haven't been, frankly, discussing this. They haven't been inviting the Australian people into the tough conversations that we need to have, that we've had a pretty peaceful, benign period since at least the end of the Cold War, and we need to be psychologically certainly preparing for a change to that. I was also really struck and sat out of my seat a bit when we did get into the topic of AUKUS, which will be the focus of one of our stories. It's not that the participants necessarily are opposed to the AUKUS Pact in any way, and they think the technology of the nuclear-powered submarines is absolutely state-of-the-art. But the issue of the time frame of when they're going to arrive, what they're going to cost, the other things that you could potentially buy in the near term with this money, we really go deep into that issue in a very frank and open way that I don't think has been had yet. Certainly not in Canberra, where both major parties are locked in agreement about it.
And when that happens, when you get the two major parties in Canberra agreeing on any one subject, it effectively kills debate. And a lot of defence policy in Australia has suffered from that over many years because of that bipartisan agreement. But people love bipartisanship, and sometimes it works really well, but other times it just stifles debate. Critical things are overlooked and bad things happen and neglect sets in.